Just want to say good afternoon and welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us today for this Georgetown Rockefeller Pivot with Purpose Job Search Seminar Series. I'm Laura Sheehan. I'm the Associate Director for Graduate Coaching at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service, and I am honored to have the privilege of hosting this particular session. Couple of quick administrative announcements. Please make sure that you're posting all of your questions into the actual Q&A down at the bottom of the screen. The chat is going to be really dynamic and active, and sometimes questions get lost because there's so many great participants. So please, again, make sure that you're putting all of your questions into the Q&A so that we can be sure to see them. As a quick recap, over the course of the last couple of months since mid-June, the Pivot with Purpose program series has covered a full range of job search topics, from setting your foundations on how to pivot to more practical, tangible things like resumes, cover letters, how to use AI in your job search, LinkedIn, interview approaches, tactics, tools, etc. And today we're kind of putting a capstone on of all of these great foundational elements with now you have hopefully landed a few. And I mean, I'm not saying that in real time, but getting you ready for that moment in time, how to negotiate salaries and benefits. So that topic causes a lot of anxiety for all of us, and we are so lucky today to be joined by Josh Doody, who is a salary negotiation coach for high earners. He's focused on helping his clients optimize their job offers to make sure they don't leave anything on the table. He studied computer and electrical engineering at the University of Florida before returning to earn his MBA. Drawing on his experience as a consultant and a hiring manager in the HRIT software industry, he wrote one of my favorite books, Fearless Salary Negotiation, which is a step-by-step guide to getting paid what you're worth. And eventually, he built his coaching business to help apply the strategy and concepts he created for the book to individual high-leverage negotiations. Now, for this particular audience, I'm also going to mention the power of connections. So back in 2017, I was working as a global employment advisor on contract to the Department of State, and I had a regional portfolio. I got to travel to Myanmar, where I was visiting with people at the U.S. Embassy there. And the CLO, the community liaison officer, for those of you who know embassy speak, was this wonderful woman named Megan Castleberry. So Megan, if you are out there, hello, hello, hello. And during or after one of my presentations on the job search, Megan came up to me and she said, "You, Laura, have got to meet one of my great friends, Josh Doody, who just wrote this book." And she gave me the link to the book, and she gave me the link to his website, told me to immediately subscribe to his newsletter, which I did. And here we are 8 years later. Thank you, Megan. And Josh is here to give us all of his great knowledge and expertise on how to accomplish a successful salary negotiation. So with that, Josh, welcome. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. Thank you for that excellent intro, Laura. That was great. Big thanks to Megan for introducing us. Yeah, networking is important. Most of the people that I work with, that's pretty much where their jobs come from. So the longer you can build that network and the deeper, the better. Let me try to share my presentation here. Should be up now. Good. Okay. Good. Well, welcome everybody. It's good to meet you all. Thank you for coming. I hope this is useful to you. And I plan to talk for maybe 20 or 25 minutes about some things that I think will be very valuable and useful to you. And then I have lots and lots of time later for Q&A. So if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. And as Laura mentioned, she'll keep an eye on those. And hopefully I'll be able to answer as many of your questions as possible. And I'm pretty easy to get in touch with if I don't answer all your questions. So you're welcome to reach out anytime after today. So today we're going to talk about a salary negotiation overview. So as Laura said, I like the idea of this being kind of a capstone. That's the way I think of it. I'm a little bit biased because this is my business. But it takes a lot of work to build a career and a skill set and expertise, and then to find opportunities to pursue, and to begin pursuing those opportunities, to interview for them, to get through the interview process, which at least at many big tech companies, they literally call an interview gauntlet or a loop. You get to the other side and hopefully get an offer. And for a lot of people, I think that's where they kind of take their foot off the gas and they feel a sense of relief and accomplishment, which they should. But there's still one more thing to do before you accept that offer, and that is to negotiate it and just make sure that you're being paid what you're worth, that you've actually captured as much of the value that you're creating for the company that you're going to be joining as possible. And so that's what we're going to talk about today is how to do that. Laura already shared a really good intro for me, so I won't say too much here, but today, I make my living as a salary negotiation coach for high earners. Most of the time, that person looks like an executive or a leader at a big public company. Not always. Frequently, I'll also work with people who are going to be executives at startups and sometimes seed stage, Series A, Series B. Or occasionally, a lot of the really big tech companies, as you've probably seen in the news, there are a lot of engineers and other people who can also be earning quite a bit of money. But when I wrote my book 10 years ago now, 10 years this year, it was really meant to be a tool to help everybody negotiate their offers. So while I happen to work with high earners now, a lot of, if you were to Google me and things I've written and podcasts that I've been on, a lot of what I've had to say, including what I'm saying today, is really meant for a more general audience who might be high earners or might be on their way to being high earners or maybe pursuing their first job out of grad school or even undergrad. And so I hope that what I'm going to talk about today is useful to everybody that's here. And I have tailored a little bit of it. I know, that this program is for a unique set of people that are in sort of a unique circumstance at a unique time in the way that public versus private employment is kind of shaping up and is still fluid. And so I'm sensitive to that. And I'm going to begin with some things that are specifically kind of to address that. So I'm going to start with the distinction between private versus public. I know many of you may have some experience or a lot of experience in the public sector. And so for many of you, hearing, negotiate salary may be, kind of it's almost a non-starter. Like, why would I do that? I know that's not really feasible. And I think that's pretty true in the public sector, but things are different in the private sector where I know most of you are focused now. And so I'll kind of share what the distinctions are so that maybe you can begin to understand how different they are and why negotiating compensation and job offers is much more useful and effective in the private sector than typically would be in the public sector. Then I'll get into some negotiation strategy and tactics. So when do you start negotiating? How do you negotiate? And then some things to think about before you negotiate that I think might be useful as you kind of make that transition from I'm interviewing to I have a job offer, I'm going to negotiate it now. And then, of course, like I said, I'll be available to take and answer as many questions as possible in the time that we have at the end. Okay, so let's talk about the difference between private and public opportunities and how your approach might be different and why. In other words, to shorten it up a little bit, why it's much easier to negotiate in the private sector than it might be in the public sector. So the first thing is, I have 3 points here. The first one is that pay ranges are just less rigid in the private sector. There's a lot more data in the private sector often, but those pay ranges that you're working in are usually a little bit more fluid and less rigid, and that is truer the more senior you go, the higher up the organizational chart that you go. And so, whereas in the public sector, a lot of times there is a specific pegged salary or compensation for a role, and it's published somewhere public, and everyone knows what it is, and that's just what it is. That can make it difficult or impossible to negotiate. Whereas in the private sector, there are a lot more companies that are competing for a lot more people, and the pay ranges are much more fluid. And I think companies are more sensitive to identifying a particular person that might be a good fit for the role and then giving themselves flexibility to make sure they get that person if they align well with a manager or with a function within that particular company and with their mission. So that's the first reason that you have a little bit more latitude to negotiate, because those pay ranges are not quite as rigid as they might be in the public sector. Negotiation is also just more common in the private sector. I think a lot of, the way people feel about negotiating, there's a reason my book is called Fearless Salary Negotiation. It can be a scary and intimidating thing. It was for me early in my career, and frankly, still is. Even when I'm working with clients, I always get butterflies. I'm a little bit nervous when we send a counteroffer when we're engaging in a negotiation. But in the private sector, it's just more common. And so, there is a sort of almost like a psychological feeling that other people have when they're being negotiated with. And so like a recruiter, for example, at a private company, They may not be thrilled that you're negotiating, but they understand it. It's a normal part of their job. They do it all the time. Whereas in the public sector, I think it is a little bit less common for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier about the rigidity of pay ranges and other factors, so that it is just less expected. And when people are surprised, they often don't react positively, and they can be more rigid and just resistant to the idea of negotiation, even as a concept, let alone the ability that they might have to be fluid within those pay ranges. So in the private sector, this is, I wouldn't say it's expected, but it's not unexpected. So if you negotiate, you're rarely going to be just totally catching a recruiter or a hiring manager off guard by negotiating. They should say, okay, I understand what this is. I'm comfortable with this. They might say, sorry, this isn't up for negotiation. We made the best offer, but they're not going to be blindsided by it or super surprised by it. Whereas I think in the public sector, frequently hiring managers, recruiters, they might be surprised that you're even trying to negotiate, that it would occur to you or that you would attempt it. And so what that does is I think it frees us up a little bit when we're working with private companies to be a little bit more direct and to just engage in a negotiation, knowing that at least they will understand where I'm coming from, why I'm doing this, and that it's kind of part of the milieu of private companies and the way that they hire people and staff. And then also something that's really interesting about private companies is that compensation packages can be multifaceted. And so, for example, at big tech companies, they have RSUs or equity. This is also true at other private companies that are not public. But a lot of private companies will have incentive-based bonus structures, or if you're in the sales side of things, what's called OTE or on-target earnings, which can be almost entirely incentive-based and almost not base salary. And so, at least from what I've seen, public sector jobs are very sort of narrowly defined in sort of what their compensation looks like. Sometimes it's a single number and then a benefits package. Whereas at private companies, there can be lots of different components in a typical compensation package. And so what that means is, again, a little bit more freedom to look at the different components and see if there is one or more components that might be negotiable within those kind of wider pay ranges. So not only the pay ranges more fluid, they are typically a little bit wider. There's more space in there. And then the components that make up a pay package are also more varied. And so there can be more opportunities to identify something that there might be flexibility on. Whereas if there's only a single component, they're either flexible or inflexible, and that's kind of it. And so all those things together make negotiation in the private sector just much more feasible and much more productive in my experience. And so I hope that gives you a little bit of encouragement, especially if you've come from the public world where maybe you've tried to negotiate and just been totally stonewalled, which happens pretty frequently, and you're transitioning to the private world. I can assure you that things are just a little bit different in the private sector. There's more openness to negotiation, and hopefully these reasons kind of give you a better sense of maybe the way that private companies are thinking about compensation versus public entities that are, using taxpayer money to pay people, for example. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you to at least consider negotiating your job offers when you start to get them. And I think one thing that might surprise you is that negotiation might start much earlier than you expect. So I have already actually sort of said, well, you find an opportunity, you begin interviewing, you finish the interviews, then you get a job offer, then you negotiate, and that's where I come in. That's mostly true, but the negotiation can actually start quite a bit earlier than that. It may begin with your first interaction with a company, the first time you talk to a recruiter or a hiring manager, and that can look like this. So I call it the salary expectations question, or the dreaded salary question, which is often framed as a screening question. That is, what are you hoping to make if you come work for us? So it seems pretty innocuous. This question might appear to just be a simple kind of checkbox, or it could even be literally on an online application, a number that you would fill in. Which, by the way, I'm sure I'll get this question, so I'll go ahead and answer it now. What do you do if you're asked for this number on an online application? Leave it blank, put a fake number in it, do anything you can to not put a real number in it, and then just see if that gets you through, and usually it will. And if it won't, they come back to you and they say, yeah, we need a real number. Then you can use the scripts that I'm about to give you to answer that question. So that's my answer to what do you do if an online application or a paper application asks you for a number in a field that you need to fill out. Don't. So they ask you, what are you hoping to come to work if you come to make if you come work for us? This is a little bit tricky because, especially the earlier in the process it is, your mindset will be something like, well, this seems like a good opportunity and I need an opportunity, so I'd like to interview. And it seems to me like if I don't answer this question, I don't get to interview. So I'm going to give them answer to this question, this number. First of all, you don't have to give them an answer. I'm going to kind of walk you through that. But second of all, that's why this is a negotiation tactic. The recruiter is already negotiating with you, trying to get you to go first, which is not in your best interest. And so I just say this so that you're aware that from the first moment that you talk to them, this could come up and you could begin that negotiation there. And then you might park it or kind of, table the negotiation until later on. But this is a negotiation step and a tactic. So what do you say if they ask you what you're hoping to work if you come hoping, I'm really mangling that. What are you hoping to make if you can work for us? And this is just kind of a quick answer that I have available. This first sentence is the one that is the most important, and the rest of it is just trying to soften that blow and hopefully appease the recruiter so they'll just keep moving. But I like to say, I don't really have a number in mind. I know I'll be a valuable addition to this team, and I look forward to hearing what you suggest when we get to that stage. So there are a few things going on here. The main thing, the most important thing is you're saying, I don't have a number for you. That's all you really need to say. But you're also couching that in terms of saying that you're going to be a valuable addition to the team. My entire negotiation strategy is value based. So this is an important way to kind of set the table for that and to kind of begin to reframe from I'm another, to put it crassly, another cog in the corporate machine and I'm looking for work to I'm a valuable asset that you could bring onto your team to accelerate things or to bring in more revenue or to ship things faster or whatever that might be. And that's the way I'm thinking about this. And then the last thing is you say, I look forward to hearing what you suggest when we get to that stage. In other words, I don't have a number for you. I know I'm going to be valuable to the team. Let's table this. And so typically this will be enough to get you past that question. You probably are already wondering, why is Josh spending so long talking about this question? And the answer is it's extremely important. When I talk to people who might be hiring me, one of the first things I ask them is, have you talked about salary yet? What did you say? And that's because I'm wondering, are we going to have to do damage control and kind of back out of this? Or did this person hopefully already read some of my work on this and they avoided sharing that information? Is it going to be hard mode or easy mode to negotiate from here on out? There are ways to recover if you do share this information, but it is definitely best to not share it. And this is by far the biggest mistake that I see people make is sharing this information early in the process, backing themselves into a corner and making it very difficult for them to kind of negotiate out of that corner later on. So to set yourself up for success, give an answer like this when they ask you what your salary expectations are. So my main takeaway here is don't share your salary expectations. This is verbally, this is in a form. Your goal is to get them to make an offer first. And the last thing I'll say on this is there's also a timeline involved here. So I mentioned that they will frequently ask you up front, what are your salary expectations? But there's still a lot of time on the calendar and time that you'll spend in interviews and talking to hiring managers before you actually get to the stage where they have even decided if they're going to make you an offer. And you want to use that time to persuade them that rather than thinking, can we hit this number that Josh said on day one when we talked to him, they should be thinking, well, we don't know what it's going to take necessarily to get Josh to accept this offer, but we understand that it needs to be a compelling offer. So what do we need to offer to persuade this person who has demonstrated they're going to be a valuable asset for our team to come join that team? That's the mindset that you want them in. And their budget might change. So when they ask you the question initially, maybe they have a budget of $100,000 a year salary in mind. And you give them a number and you're kind of locked in. But as you talk to them, they might think, well, we had budgeted $100,000 for this, but the more we talk to this person, the more positive feedback we get. Maybe we need to be more flexible on that. Maybe we need to go above 100,000. Maybe our offer needs to be a little bit more compelling so we don't lose this candidate and have to go try to find another one who's just as good, knowing that there might not be other candidates that are a good fit. So you can actually affect the budget and what they're willing to pay you throughout the process. And it's much harder to do that if you have already drawn a line in the sand from day one. So don't share your salary expectations. I know, again, it seems like I'm spending a lot of time on this, and I guarantee that almost all of you, there will be a moment, maybe not too long from now, when you go, oh, okay, I see. Like I'm experiencing stress right now, and I don't know how to answer this, but at least Josh gave me some scripts that I can use to kind of walk through this and avoid making that mistake so I have maximum opportunity to negotiate later. Okay. So once you do get an offer, you should negotiate them. So that's why I'm here, is to kind of walk you through that. And so that's the first thing I want to emphasize is, for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, negotiation is a common thing, especially in the private sector. It may not be quote unquote welcome, but it will be mostly expected. And most companies of some level of sophistication, so maybe beyond like mom and pop shop, and that could be like a tech company that's mom and pop, but beyond like a 5 or 6 person company where they have maybe a dedicated HR function or a dedicated recruiter, most of those people will understand how to navigate a negotiation. And so they'll be at least comfortable with and have a playbook available to themselves to kind of respond when you negotiate. And the main reason that you should negotiate, it's a little tautological, but it's because there might be room to negotiate. Most of the time, when companies make offers, they're sensitive to the fact that some people will want to ask for more money, and that it feels not very good if you ask for more money and you just get totally shut down. And so they'll build buffer into their offer just in case this person happens to ask for money. I know this to be true from my experience in my career in HR IT software. I know this from experience as a hiring manager. And even recently, I'm an advisor to an autonomous robotics startup. And I am there to advise the CEO on hiring decisions and comp packages that he's offering to different types of people. And we frequently have this discussion about, what is your full budget and what are you willing to offer and what's the difference there and what are you going to do if they ask for more money? And so there's this sort of system that's built in that sort of allows for the idea that the person might negotiate and allows the company to acquiesce and to engage in a negotiation and help the person to feel like, yes, you're negotiating. We acknowledge that. We are going to give you a win for negotiating. Please come work for us. So very rarely then do companies make their absolute top, best and final offer up front. And because of that, you should negotiate because there's basically an arbitrage opportunity on just the way that job offers are structured in the private sector. Also, it's a good opportunity just to make sure that you have peace of mind that when you start the job, you're being paid maximum. It's not a good feeling. I've experienced this a few times in my career early on where I would start a job and literally on day one be like, what if I had asked for more? This first paycheck is coming in 2 weeks. Could it be bigger? I don't know. And I will never know. But I suspect it could have been if I had asked. And so you don't want to have that feeling of regret. And the best way to avoid that feeling is to negotiate. So how do you do that tactically? The first thing that you want to do is think about, I mentioned earlier that a lot of private sector job offers are going to be multifaceted. They're going to have lots of different components. Sometimes it's a really straightforward base salary and that's it. And then there's a benefits package with vacation time and sick time and a 401k match and all that good stuff. Sometimes it's really simple like that. So your priorities, you might still have some, but mostly it's going to be base salary. I want to maximize that base salary. But sometimes there will be other components like a bonus structure of some kind, like I mentioned for OTE on the sales side. Like, what does the bonus structure look like? What is the top end available to you on that side? And there might be equity involved. It could be public company RSUs, or it could be stock options. There could be performance bonuses, and there might be other things that are part of their key package. For example, if it's a hybrid opportunity and it's remote 2 days a week and in office 3 days a week, maybe that could be flipped and it could be 3 and 2 instead of 2 and 3. And so you want to look at what is being offered to me, what do I think is negotiable, and what is my top priority, what's my second priority, what's my third priority. And the reason you want to do that is that the best way to negotiate to get the most of the thing or the things that are most valuable to you is to negotiate one thing at a time. So the counter to this would be what I call the kitchen sink strategy, which frequently I'll get emails about this, where somebody will say, okay, I got a job offer and they offer me this salary and this amount of equity and this bonus structure and this sign-on bonus and this amount of vacation. So I countered and said I wanted that salary and that equity and that bonus structure and that sign-on bonus and that amount of vacation. What did I do wrong? And the answer is, you ask for more than one thing. The reason that people do this, and I understand it, is that they're thinking, well, if I give them a lot of options on stuff when I negotiate, then surely they have to give me something. I have to be able to get something by negotiating. And you're right about that. The problem is that I just mentioned, rank your priorities top to bottom, base salary, equity, sign-on bonus, bonus structure, vacation time, whatever those things are. If you make that ranking, it's going to be basically like what's most valuable to me, which almost always translates to what's the most dollars in my pocket. So probably base salary first and then equity, maybe sign-on bonus, the bonus structure. The company does the same thing. They make a list, but their list is what are the things that are most expensive to give this person? And their list is going to look just like your list most of the time, but upside down. And so if you give them your full list of things that you would like, that's 5 or 6 things deep, they're going to have a similar list that's also 5 or 6 things deep, and it's going to be inverted. So they're going to say, okay, I'll tell you what, we'll give you 3 of the 5 things you asked for. You can have 2 more days of vacation. Here's another $5,000 sign-on bonus and a little bit more equity. And then your feeling will probably be something like, okay, well, I got some stuff, but my base salary is still the same and my bonus is still the same. And that's not really what I wanted. Really what I wanted was more base salary, but I asked for a bunch of stuff hoping to get that and maybe something else. And so to counter that, what you do is you laser focus on the thing that you care about the most. This is usually going to be base salary. In some cases, it will be equity. In some cases, it will be something else. Occasionally, there's a thing that happens, especially with big tech offers, which is they talk about total comp. They lump together the things that are probably the most valuable to most people, which is base salary, equity, and some kind of bonus. All of those are basically different versions of cash in your pocket. It's either a base salary cash in your pocket or an equity vest that's going to be annual or quarterly or monthly cash in your pocket, or a sign-on bonus that can be cash in your pocket. And so that's the one time I think it's okay to combine things into the one thing, quote unquote, being total compensation. So if that's available, you could use that as your one thing. You'll know if it's available usually because the recruiter will talk about total compensation. So if they're describing your offer to you as we're going to offer you this much base salary and maybe this other component, maybe they're not thinking total comp. But if they do say, yeah, and that's a total compensation of $180,000 a year, then you know that they're thinking total comp, and you can probably negotiate on that total comp as your quote unquote one thing. Because all of those things lumped together are basically cash equivalents or similar, and that's how they are doing their books in terms of what is it going to cost to employ this person. That total comp number is the thing that matters. But you want to pick one thing and not a menu of things is kind of the point here. There will often be just base salary with a couple other things behind it. It might be total comp with a couple other things behind it. So pick one thing. That's what you're going to negotiate. How much do you ask for? So now you've chosen the one thing. Let's say it's base salary. Let's say the offer was for $100,000. What do you ask for? The answer is, in general, my rule of thumb is 10 to 20% above what they offered on the thing that you're asking for. So if they offered 100,000, you would ask for somewhere between 110 and 120,000. The reason for this is very pseudoscientific. But based on my consulting experience and the work that I did, when I wrote my book, I actually, the chapter on how to negotiate job offers, I rewrote the chapter top to bottom 3 times. This number on the screen right now was one of the trickier things because there was not literature on it. There was not sort of common wisdom on it. And so I talked to some other consultants in the space who consulted on compensation planning. And we decided that 10 to 20% was the right range based on our own experience, based on what we'd seen consulting for companies. And now after 10 years of doing this, I can say this is a pretty good range. So there's sometimes you're creating new ideas and you kind of take a shot and you get lucky. And I got lucky here. So 10 to 20% is good. The reason is 10% is just low enough that nobody really will bat an eye at it. It's just not enough of a move to be uncomfortable for the company making the offer. So 10% is when you're going to be not particularly aggressive. And I'll talk about that in a second. So if they offered 100 and you ask for 110, it's a little bit more, but it's not enough to make them go, ooh. It's still well within the range, and it's probably kind of a rounding error on their balance sheet. On the other hand, 20% is pretty aggressive. That's a number where they're not just going to go, okay, and shrug. They'll say, oh, 20%, that's okay. I need to think about this. Let me see if I can justify it. So that's a strong kind of aggressive counter. There are cases when you might go below 10, pretty rare, or above 20, also pretty rare. But this 10 to 20% range is pretty good. And the kind of quick way that you can figure this out is, in my book, I write 2 questions that you can answer and a little bit of math that you can do. But I've kind of narrowed it down to this one thing, which is how badly do they need to hire you? So you've been through interviews, you've talked to the hiring manager, you have a sense of how important this role is to them, how long they've been trying to fill it, how many other people that they might have considered for the role, if they've made other offers that were declined, quite a bit of information. And so if you can quantify, somewhere between like 0 and 10 on a 10 point scale, where 10 is they need me pretty badly, there's nobody else that they can find, I'm the person to do this job, then you'll counter at 20%. And if it's a 0, if they've got 8 other people they're thinking about and they just happen to make the offer to you, you'll counter at 10%. So you start at 10% and just add 1 point for every point 0 to 10 that they need to hire you. So the worse they need to hire you, the more desperate they are to hire you, the better a fit you are, the more you can counter up to about 20%. And again, you're going to start with the one thing. You're going to pick one thing, you're going to counter 10 to 20% on that thing, and your judgment will be how badly do they need to fill this role. The last thing I'll say, a couple of things here before we move to the what to expect or how to prepare for your negotiation, is that your yes is valuable. So something that you may be thinking right now is, well, what's my leverage here? I mentioned earlier, I'm a value-based kind of person. So your leverage is often, what kind of value are you going to bring? But also it's important to understand that your yes is valuable. The company, by the time they have gotten to the point where they've made you an offer, has spent a lot of money and time, a lot of resources. So if you think about every person that interviewed you, what that person's hourly bill rate is, if they flew you on site, if they put you up in a hotel, anything that they did in the hiring process to get to the point where they're making you an offer is a cost that they have incurred to get to the point to make you the offer. And it's much cheaper for them if they can get you to say yes, even if they have to give you a little bit more cash comp to do it, than it is to start that process over and re-spend all that money again to find another candidate who may not even be as good as you are for this job. And so from that perspective, your yes is valuable. There's also a time component. Most of the time, if they're hiring, it's because they have something that needs to be done yesterday. A lot of companies hire behind demand. And so your yes gets that hiring manager a person to join their team to help start adding value right now. And they don't want to wait another 90 days or 4 months or whatever to find that next person. So just your yes is valuable. And by negotiating, you're putting the company in a situation where they can acknowledge that value and maybe compensate you a little bit better than they initially suggested when they made the offer. So your leverage is your yes. It's also the value that you bring and a bunch of other things that are a little bit less tangible. But yes is a very valuable word. And a lot of times the way that they can get you to say yes is to work with you and to negotiate your comp up a little bit. One last thing I'll say here is I don't talk about this much here just because it's kind of beyond the scope of this particular talk, but the way that I recommend you counter is in email. And so there are lots of reasons for that, but that's something to think about is if you can, you want to get offline, get the numbers from the offer, ask for time to consider the offer, and then craft an email counter offer. Think about it carefully, put it together, include your case for why you're valuable, and also that number, that 10 to 20% above their offer number with the one thing. You want to do that in an email whenever possible. Most companies will essentially just kind of let you do this. So when I wrote the book, it was less common that they would let you do this. And so there's some strategizing in there about, okay, we're going to have a phone call. How can you pre-plan for like a decision tree to get you through this phone call and negotiate a successful job offer? I did that personally when I negotiated my last job offer as a person who had a day job. I think nowadays it's just more acceptable. Recruiters will just kind of shrug when you say, hey, let me think about this and I'll get back to you. They'll say, okay. And then you hang up the phone and then you put it together to email and you write them and you say, hey, I was thinking about the offer. Here's what I think. And here's my counteroffer. You won't explicitly say, here's my counteroffer. But that's what it would look like. So when you're countering, it's 10 to 20% on the one thing you care about in an email format, whenever possible, which is almost like 99% of the time, you can send a counteroffer over email. It's much better for you. It gives you a chance to articulate your case better. And a lot of times when you're counter offering and asking for more money, there will be people that need to approve what you ask for. And so by writing an email, you can kind of write them an email. So you're creating a document that can be circulated internally. So you can make your own case for why you're more valuable, why you should get the money that you're asking for. And you're not relying on a recruiter to kind of summarize why maybe you want more money. And you're saying in your own words, here's why I think I'm valuable. Here's what I would like. Can you make this happen? So when they're circulating internally for approvals, you get to speak indirectly to those people who are approving rather than relying on essentially a game of telephone that goes through your recruiter who probably has 15 or 20 other candidates that they're going to talk to in the next couple of days. And they don't know you as well as you know yourself. Okay. So before you negotiate, just a couple of things that I think will help set you up for a successful negotiation, in addition to not sharing your comp expectations. How to use positioning. So I know that you have already learned a little bit about interview technique and how to think through that. And so I'm not going to do a deep dive on interview strategy, but I will share kind of my personal philosophy on it, and just in case it's useful to you. So positioning is a way that I like to prepare for interviews and just conversations in general with recruiters, hiring managers, peers, dotted line managers, executives at the company you might be talking to, essentially to give them an opportunity to understand how well you know their business and how valuable you are going to be so that you stand out from everybody else who's interviewing. One of the biggest problems with interviewing is that frequently you will be one of a number of very similar looking candidates. Either, I used to say, like a stack of resumes on a desk and yours is one piece of paper in that stack. I think that's much less common now, but, a stack of Indeed applications or however you got to this role or LinkedIn outreach or whatever. And your job is to say, yeah, you have 20 people that you're talking to, but I'm the person for this job. Here is why. And so here's how to do that. It's using a thing called positioning. Positioning is most often associated with marketing and advertising and sales. And it's essentially positioning your product as a solution to the problem of the person that you're advertising to or the person that you're selling to. In this case, you're selling yourself to a company, which can be very uncomfortable for people, but it's super important to do because you have to distinguish yourself from those other people. And so there are really only two words that you need to remember. If you take away two words, one word is goals, and the second word is challenges. So the person who's interviewing you has things they're trying to accomplish. That's why they're interviewing you. They're trying to fill a role, to do more work, to make more money, to save on cost, to ship things faster, whatever that is. They have things they're trying to accomplish. The better you understand those things and can articulate to them how you'll help them accomplish those goals, the more you'll stand out. The other thing is that there are things that are preventing them from accomplishing those things. So they have things they're trying to accomplish, but they have speed bumps that are in the way. They have challenges that they're facing. And the better you understand what their challenges are, then the more you can articulate to them how you can help them overcome those challenges. This will help you stand out from other resumes because all the resumes or candidates or CVs have a similar set of experience and qualifications, or they wouldn't be in that particular group of candidates. And so your job is to say, yes, I'm similarly qualified on paper to these other people, but I understand what you're trying to accomplish and what's preventing you from accomplishing those things better than those people. And that's why you should put me on your team. And immediately you'll be elevated to the top of the metaphorical pile of resumes. So you want to just describe how you'll help with each. That's ultimately what you should be doing when you're interviewing is you're having a conversation. You're not reciting your resume or your LinkedIn profile because they've already seen that. They have access to that. It's very easy to find, and that's why you're talking to them. They know that information. What you want to do is give them new information, which is how you're going to help them identify their goals and accomplish them and identify their challenges and overcome them. After each interview, so this is where it's kind of a recursive interview strategy where you get to update every time. So before you talk to anybody at the company, you might figure this out by looking at their presence on social media, on LinkedIn. You might read their public SEC statements, 10K type of thing. See what they're saying about headwinds and about goals for the company. See if you can find, maybe their CEO is a publicly vocal person who talks about what they're trying to accomplish with their company, and just see what they're trying to accomplish as a company. What's their mission statement on their website, that kind of thing. But as you have interviews, you'll talk to people and they will give you information if you ask for it. So usually they'll interview you for 40 or 45 minutes, let's say, and then they'll say, hey, I've been talking for 45 minutes. Do you have any questions for me? And you could say, as a matter of fact, I do. What are you working on right now? What's keeping you up at night? What are your primary goals as a team, as an organization? What do what's your North Star right now? And you could say, what's slowing you down? Like what's getting in your way? What kind of problems are you trying to solve right now as a team? And they will tell you. And the reason they'll tell you is that people, one, like to talk about themselves, and two, almost certainly right before you were interviewed, they were trying to accomplish those goals and overcome those challenges. And in fact, your interview probably interrupted that process. So if you can look at it from like a hiring manager's perspective, usually what happens is they're at their desk, they're on the phone, they're sending an email, they're trying to put out a fire, and they get like a calendar reminder. It's like, ding, 10 minutes until your interview with Josh. And they go, oh, Josh, who's that? And they start scrambling, trying to find that resume. They're looking at the calendar, right? Who is this person? I don't know who this person is. They pause that. They pick up the phone and they say, hey, Josh, it's so great to talk to you. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. And they have no idea who you are 5 seconds ago. And when they finish that interview, they're going to hang up the phone. They're going to go, and they're going to go back to trying to put out that fire to accomplish that goal. And so that's what they're thinking about. That is literally what's keeping them up at night. And so when you ask them about it, they'll be almost relieved to talk about it because they can get back into work mode. Oh, as a matter of fact, we're trying to develop this new product. Or what. They're ready to talk about these things, and they will tell you. And then you can use that as intelligence that you can use for your next interview to talk about how you can help with those specific goals and challenges, which now you have is really good inside information from your previous interview. And then at the end of that interview, they'll ask you again. You ask them what they're working on, what their challenges are, and you'll get more information. And so now your interview answers will be much more rich because you'll be talking about the things they're trying to accomplish, using positioning to describe how it is that you will help them to accomplish those things or overcome those challenges if they bring you onto the team. Okay, so that's my interview strategy in a nutshell. Again, 2 words, goals and challenges. Understand what those are. Just talk to them about how you'll help them with their goals and challenges, and you will stand out from other candidates. The last thing I think that you need before you start negotiating is a minimum acceptable salary. And so your minimum acceptable salary is literally, what is my walkaway number? What is the number that they have to offer me? This could be a total comp number. It could be a base salary number, whatever it is, to do this job. Right? Every job is going to have a number. And by the way, this isn't necessarily a universal number. Each job could have its own minimum acceptable salary. So you might have 3 opportunities that are coming your way, and each one will have a minimum for different reasons. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think it's important to know that each opportunity you have should have a minimum number that you're willing to accept. And there are 2 reasons for this. One is a question that you're going to have when you get the offer from them is this good? There's not necessarily an objective answer to that unless you have a minimum salary in mind before they make you the offer. And so now you can evaluate the goodness of the offer by comparing it to the number that you wrote down beforehand. So I said I would accept this job for no less than $100,000. They offered me $105,000. That's a good offer. Can it be better? Let's find out. Let's negotiate. There's a different situation, which is, well, I said I wouldn't accept the job for less than $100,000. They offered me $80,000. It's a big miss by them. Can it be saved? Maybe. There are ways to save an offer like that and negotiate. But at least you can objectively say, this offer is not good. It is not to my standard and it's not my minimum number. And therefore, my default mode for this offer at $80,000 when I need $100,000 is I don't plan to accept this offer. I am going to try to save it by negotiating it. But out of the gate, I can say, this is not a good offer. And if you have both of those at the same time and you happen to have the same minimum for each, you can say, well, one was good, 105, good. 80, not good. And so you immediately kind of know which way you're leaning and which one you're trying to do the most work with. So this is an important metric for you because one, it helps you to evaluate the goodness of the offer, but two, it will inform your negotiation strategy. Negotiating an $80,000 offer, much different than negotiating a $105,000 offer if your minimum is $100,000 for each one. And so because of that, you want to already have kind of a plan going in and a way to objectively say, what does my strategy need to be for this particular opportunity? Whereas if you just react to the offer, you might not know how to feel about it. This happens to a lot of people that I work with. They say, I got the offer. And they're like, is this a good offer? They're asking me if it's a good offer. I'm like, I don't know. I'm not you. So let's talk about some things that might contribute to your ability to set your minimum acceptable salary. So one is salary reference points, market data. This could be Glassdoor. If it's in tech, Levels FYI. There's a lot of salary websites out there. To be honest with you, I've kind of stopped naming them because they change so much. But I will say, ChatGPT and the other LLMs, pretty good at this. So this is something that I would rely on ChatGPT for this before anything else right now, and then go see if I could check it when it gives me information. So that's the first thing, is figure out like what is an acceptable, like what's the common compensation range for this role, is a very legitimate thing to wonder before you decide how much they're going to have to pay you to do it. If you have to relocate, then the cost of living in the area for that role is very significant. I just talked to somebody yesterday. He lives in the Bay Area. SpaceX is trying to bring him into Austin. And so a lot of our conversation was, well, how much different is the cost of living in Austin than the Bay Area? And the answer is, it's very different. But we're trying to dig in and figure out what his minimum is because it matters to him. He's going to have to relocate his family, and he needs to know how good can this offer be, and I accept it, versus it's too low even for Austin relative to the Bay Area. So the cost of living in the area you're going to should be a significant input if you're talking about multiple areas and you might have to move. Do you have other opportunities or not? How good are those opportunities? Should be significant. If you've got 20 opportunities that are lined up at your door making you offers, you can be pretty selective. If you have 0 other opportunities, you might be less selective. And that's just the reality of the world, depending on how badly you need this job. So definitely consider how much optionality do you have? More optionality means more selective, maybe higher minimum salaries. Less optionality, less selective, lower minimum salaries. How much risk is involved with this job? There are some jobs where it's an easy slam dunk job. You'll show up, you'll do a good job, and you'll be there for 20 years. And there's some where you can look at it and say, this company is risky. It's a startup. I don't even know if it's going to be around in a year, or the role that I'm being hired for is risky, or this is, some kind of a skunkworks program within a company and we don't know if it's going to last. So you want to definitely get a risk profile, and the riskier the job is, the higher your minimum should be. You have to compensate yourself for that risk somehow. So you're not just taking wild risks and not being paid for them, because that could leave you in a bad spot. And then the last thing is your overall feel for the role. So I think this is a little bit squishier. It's a little bit more subjective, but it does matter. You might have 2 opportunities that on paper are exactly the same opportunity, but you just got a better vibe from one company that you're interviewing with than the other one. That vibe is worth something. It's your intuition telling you, this is a company that I would be more comfortable working for, I think, than that company. And so maybe I'll accept a little less for this company that I have a better feeling about than the other company. They might need to pay me more to make it work. And the last thing I'll say on that is you need to, like I said earlier, write it down. So literally pick a number. My minimum acceptable salary for this job is $100,000. Write it down on a piece of paper. And that way, when you get that offer, you can look at it on that paper and say, objectively, I can evaluate the offer relative to this. And now I can decide, what is my strategy for negotiating relative to how my minimum acceptable salary stacks up to the offer that they made. Okay. So that's all I have for my core presentation. I'm happy to answer questions as long as we have them. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to you, Laura, and you can tell me, what are the questions?
Yes. Okay, so we've got more than 50 questions in our Q&A section. So thank you everybody for putting those questions in. Some of them I think have been answered along the way, and I think that's really critical. I've been taking notes and have kind of rank ordered the categories of questions. So we're going to start with the number one most asked question in a variety of different ways. And that is more and more often, these the application platforms are absolutely requiring that you put in either a number or a salary range. So how do you get around the not putting in a number when it's absolutely required in order to move forward with the application process?
My preference, if you can, is to put in a bogus number that's obviously fake and just see if you get away with it. So, without going too deep on this, so there's form validation is a thing in software engineering. So the question is, how sophisticated is this form? Is the form literally just demanding that you put something in the blank to move on, or is the form actually validating what the data you put in? So, for example, if you put in 9999999, obviously a fake number might satisfy the form, and you can just move forward. That will frequently work. And if it does, what I mean by work is that will push it back to a human who will say, this is a fake number. They will call you and say, hey, you put in, or email you, you put in a fake number. What's the real number? Then you can fall back to the scripts that I shared earlier, ideally. It's pretty rare, I think, that they will just totally stop the process and just say, we refuse to move forward whatsoever if you don't give us a number right here. This could happen. The one time it could happen, I mentioned at the very beginning, I mentioned networking is super important because of the story that you told about how we met, Laura. And that is true. So if you have found an opportunity through a referral or through your network, it's just very rare for them to stop the process because you won't give them a number. If you're cold applying to lots and lots of opportunities and you're a stranger to them, maybe they will kind of hold the process up. If they do, so what if you are forced to put a number in and it is a validated real number, the highest number that you can put in? I don't like that. It's not good negotiating strategy. But if you must put in a number and you know that the acceptable numbers are 100 to 120,000, put 120,000. So at least you're hitting the top of the range on the form that you must fill out. That doesn't mean that you can't negotiate later. It does box you in a little bit, but I mentioned earlier there are ways to recover if you've shared expectations. This would be a case of that. The ways you recover are sometimes that's one number among many that will be components of the job offer. You can negotiate other numbers, or once you see the benefits package and everything, you can go back and say, well, I said 120 when I fill out the application. Now I've seen the benefits and the other components of the offer. I'd be more comfortable at 135, right? In other words, everyone knows that a base salary is not a thing that's in a vacuum. There's a lot of other stuff that's part of a quote unquote job offer or an employment opportunity. And so you can use that as kind of an excuse to go back and negotiate, even if you already pegged at the beginning.
Okay, and perfect lead into the next largest or most asked set of questions, and that's related to the range, right? So if the job comes with a posted salary range, should you go outside of that range? And follow-up question to that, Josh, a lot of the positions to which this amazing audience are applying um, have very limited salary opportunities, right? They're NGOs, they're nonprofits. So what do you do when your previous salary may have been higher? So question number one is, what if a range is proposed? Do you ever go outside of that range? Question number two, what if you going into this job application know that the salary for this particular position is going to be less than what you are accustomed to making?
Yeah, I'll go backwards on that. Sometimes that's just the reality of the world is that you'll go from, I did this twice in my career, by the way. I changed careers and I took less than I was making before. That will just happen sometimes. I don't think that's necessarily, I don't think you should feel bad about that, other than you'll have smaller numbers in your paycheck. Sometimes you have to make a career move that is a step backwards in terms of pay so that you can climb a taller ladder later. And I think that's a totally acceptable thing, even as somebody who is a professional salary negotiator. Sometimes you just end up a little bit behind where you were on your last job because you're investing in the future and you're playing a long game. So I think that's fine. And if you have to do that, then you have to do that. It's just the way things work as you kind of move into a new industry. If you are applying to a job where they have a posted range, there are two kind of answers to that question. Like I said, sometimes, for example, right now, if you go look at a bunch of jobs at, I don't know, Netflix, uh, they will have posted salary ranges that will literally be like $90,000 to $600,000. And so that makes it really easy because like, yeah, I'm in that range. Yeah, sure. 600K, I'll take it, if I have to. Or sometimes you'll actually have companies where they will post a salary range, but there's also going to be equity or a bonus or something like that. And you can negotiate those things instead. So the base salary is 90K, but there's also all this other stuff that might add up to more than 90K if you're in sales or something. In which case, I think it's fine to kind of shrug and say, sure, the base salary will work. I'll negotiate the other stuff. Um, and the last one is, what if the range is actually all there is? It's a base salary. It's advertised at, $80,000 to $110,000. Can you go outside of it? I think yes, you can. Be aware that you might run into a wall at that top end, but I wouldn't say that there's any reason that you cannot negotiate above the top. Again, because hypothetically, what you would have done is implicitly or explicitly agreed to that range at the beginning of the process. You applied to the job after all, and it was posted. But you might get there and say, I know this goes up to 110, but now that I've seen the vacation time, the PTO, the benefits package, the 401k match, I'd be more comfortable at something higher than that range. And that allows two things. One is, who knows, maybe it's not a firm range. Maybe you can go a little bit higher. Two, maybe they can give you something else. They can say, well, or three, at least they peg the range for you. They're very rarely going to say the range is 80 to 110. We're going to offer you 110. That's pretty rare. And so if they're at, 100, maybe you say, I'd be more comfortable at 115 or 117, knowing that they'll hopefully kind of meet in the middle at 110. So even going out, you don't want to go way outside. So if they're saying this goes up to 110, you don't want to say, well, I'm at 160. That's going to be a challenging negotiation. But going a little bit above it, I think is fine as a way to peg to the top, maybe get something that isn't listed as like quote unquote base compensation, or to find out if maybe that's a fuzzy top end and not a firm top end.
Great. Thank you. So I think that answers a lot of questions. We research salary ranges through AI, ChatGPT being step number one. Number two, if a range is provided, it's okay to stay, or it's okay to go a little bit outside of that range. Going for the top end is a good first tactic. Taking a salary that is less than what you're used to making is also sometimes necessary, both financially, just the realities of needing money to be coming in, and also to facilitate a pivot. So playing that long game. Another whole big set of questions, because we have so many people in this audience as well, who are or have either come from a consulting background where their hourly rates are based on the last 3 years, let's just say, of hourly rates or earnings. Similar, lots of questions about what if their company is requiring that I prove my current or past salary amounts. Anything that you can, and I guess as a second or third part of that question, if you are coming from a background where consulting, for example, is based on previous earnings, how do you talk through taking a lower salary and the impact that has on your future earnings?
Yeah, that's kind of a nuanced question because the question really is, how were you being paid? Were you a 1099 or a W-2? So if you're a consultant who's an independent consultant, you're 1099, you're not employed by the company, you're an outside consultant. And so they're paying you as if you were a company, basically. Um, you will take a pay cut almost certainly when you go to W-2. So that's something we would prepare for. My kind of rule of thumb is I usually go think of it the other way, but if you're a W-2 and you're thinking about going independent and being your own company, how much do you need to make to break even on your W-2 comp? And the answer is about 50% more. And what that means if you're going the other way, so if you're used to making $150 an hour, and you're going to go to W-2, you can expect to make about a third less. So $100 an hour as a W-2 is equivalent to like $150 an hour as an independent company, as an independent consultant. And the reason for that is basically just as an independent consultant, which I am, by the way, you are on the hook for a lot of things that a W-2, a company will pay on your behalf. Those are still your expenses, but they're hidden from you because the company is paying payroll taxes and Social Security and Medicare taxes and a bunch of other stuff. And so that's kind of that's one thing is, understand that if you're making 115 hours an independent consultant working as your own company and you go to a W-2 company, they're probably not going to match that. And if they do, that's a win for you. That's a big upgrade. Um, if you were, consulting, like you're an internal consultant for, any of the big consulting companies, right? And you had a rate as a W-2 for them, and now you're going to a different company. One, those might just be apples and oranges. But two, understand that might be a step back kind of opportunity. It depends on where you're going, right? Because obviously you're leaving consulting. Everyone knows consulting can be pretty lucrative, but it also can be very, very, very taxing. It's a hard way to make a living. And so you might end up taking a step back. Three is, I think implicit in there is like, well, should I tell my new company that I was making a lot more money before? My answer to that, again, I just had a conversation yesterday about this with somebody. You can tell them that information anytime you want. So you might tell them, I don't know if I can accept that. I need to negotiate. Here's why. I was making 30% more than you just offered at my last opportunity. I wouldn't lead with it though, because first you want to confirm that they're not willing to pay you more than you were making before anyway. So that's kind of what you're trying to avoid with like not sharing your salary expectations and these kind of things is you might think that you know what they're going to pay you, and you're probably wrong. And you're either wrong on the high side, meaning you're expecting more than they're willing to pay, in which case you don't want to scare them off because, like I said, their budget could change as they talk to you. So they may not talk to you if you say your number up front, but they may be entertaining of your number if you persuade them that you're the right person for the role and you bring that number up later. But you also might undershoot, which is the worst kind of outcome because then you literally just cost yourself money. And so you avoid sharing numbers because you want them to make an offer because who knows, maybe they'll share a number bigger than what you would have asked for. I've had a number of times over my career where somebody told me I was going to say number X and they came back at 2X is what the offer looked like. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's happened several times where it's like I'm always like, yep, that's why you don't say a number. So you're going to avoid sharing a number. And later on, let's say they make you an offer, you try to negotiate, they're not budging. Maybe they're not at your minimum acceptable salary. Now you need to really say, listen, I can't accept this job for less than this number. You could also say, and one reason for that is all the things that I already told you in my counteroffer, but also at my last job, I was making 30% more. And so I'm just trying to not take a huge step back. Can you help me close that gap? And a lot of times they'll say, let me see what I can do. And that's where you might end up with a sign on bonus or a little bit more salary or something. So I don't think you should lead with your current salary, even if you suspect it's quite a bit higher than what they're offering or going to offer. And the reason is you can share that information at any time, along with your salary expectations or your minimum acceptable salary. All those numbers are always available to you as cards that you can play at any time. The earlier you play them, usually the less beneficial they will be to you.
And what about the situations where prior salary history is required to be disclosed?
Yeah, I don't love that. Especially in the private sector. Well, first of all, there are a lot of states now that have just outlawed that. You cannot ask about current salary or salary history. It's just not even on the table. I think Washington State, California, maybe New York, and some other ones. So that's one, is they probably shouldn't be asking for that. Two, the first thing I would say is if a company is saying, I want to know your salary history, I would say if I was working with somebody and they came to me and they said, Josh, I'm talking to this company, they want my salary history. I would say that's a red flag because your salary history has no bearing on the value that you're going to bring to that company or what they should pay you. It really doesn't. And so if they're trying to essentially probably trying to underpay you by getting you to reveal your salary history, for me, that's at least a yellow flag and maybe a red flag. Um, if they're going to actually require you to send like a W-2 and prove what your previous comp was, I guess you just kind of have to do that. And I would also be looking for people on LinkedIn that I can reach out to who might have openings.
Yeah, and I've seen in the federal government sometimes where people are required to provide their previous salary history. Sometimes, most of the time, it's optional. The
Yep.
other instance, and especially for this audience that I'm going to acknowledge, is that outside of the United States, that salary history
Hmm.
is often required. So for the international audience members, that is something that is different outside of the United States, and maybe something that you have to navigate depending on the employer. We are
Yep.
at the top of the hour, Josh, so I want to be cognizant and very sensitive to your time. One last question that was brought up by a bunch of different people related to essentially navigate or negotiating for those salaries outside of base salary. So a couple things that came up were additional paid time off, negotiating potentially a less than full-time schedule for a job that was advertised full-time, also remote option versus in person. And the other thing that I think a lot of us from the public sector are not too familiar with is asking for or negotiating equity. So if there's
Hmm.
any way to, to quickly to talk through any one of those and as a side question, with the one item at a time, a tactic, if you don't get one, when do you move to number two or number three, or how do you handle the beyond the number one option? So maybe
Yep.
that's the way to start in terms of the different benefits.
Yeah, this is a great question. I'll try to give as concise an answer as possible. So first, some of those things you mentioned, there's a thing I don't love this title, but this is what I've been calling it lately, so I'll probably just go with it. I call it the freebie window. Um, Sometimes when you're negotiating, there's a window of time when you can get stuff for free that you think you might have to negotiate, like a start date or your remote work. And that is after you've agreed to your comp package and before you sign the papers. Um, is the freebie window. And the reason is they now know you're not going to ask for any more compensation and that you are right. You're literally standing at the finish line and you're like touching the ribbon, but not breaking it yet. And they're right there with you. And they're like, come on, just cross the finish line so we can close this candidate out and go on to the next one. And you say, but wait, before I go across this finish line, I was wondering, I know you wanted me to start in 3 weeks, but I had a vacation plan. I really like to start in 6 weeks. And a lot of times they'll go, okay, fine, whatever. Just cross the finish line. So that's the first thing that I would say is think about whether or not it's actually something you need to negotiate as I call it your core negotiation, or if it's something that you might get in the freebie window. One way to think about that is whose discretion is this? Whose budget is this coming out of? Who owns this thing? A lot of times the answer in your mind will probably be, you know what? I think the hiring manager probably owns that. The start date, HR and recruiting generally don't care what your start date is. They literally don't care. Their job is to coordinate your start date, to onboard you, and to get you all the paperwork and get your computer access and all that stuff and get your laptop in the mail or whatever. But they don't care if you start tomorrow or 6 months from now. They just close the candidate and move on. The hiring manager, however, has a lot of skin in the game there, and they want you to start at a certain time probably. But they also understand they found the right person. Would I rather start the hiring process over or just say, fine, start in a month instead of 2 weeks? Probably the latter. So that's the first thing is you rank your stuff that matters to you and ask yourself, whose discretion is this and can I get it in the freebie window? If you can get it in the freebie window, set it aside, save it for the freebie window. For the other things, a lot of this is implicitly answered by, how do you ask for things that are not salary? Well, what's the most valuable thing to you? Should you ask for fully remote work? Yes, if it's a deal breaker. So that's how you know it shouldn't go in the freebie window is like, I will not work for this company if I have to go into the office 5 days a week. I won't do it. Then you should negotiate that because there's no point in negotiating that and then finding out that I have to go into the office. Like, what are we doing here? But it's an opportunity I'm interested in. And if it is more important for me to go into the office than it is to have more compensation, you should negotiate that. And so that would be at the top of your list of items. That's maybe number one or number two after base salary or something. And so that's how it kind of, that's one thing I like about this method of the ranking method is that it forces you to implicitly face, do I want base salary or equity more? Do I want remote work or base salary more? And you have to answer that question. And then you know your negotiating order. You'll get to two or three of those things. How do you get to them? So typically there's some intuition here. This is why I have a job, to be honest, is, there's some intuition here, but you will counteroffer on something and they will respond. And if you think about their response, it will reveal to you a lot of information. So they offer 100,000. I counter at 120,000. They come back and say, nope, we're stuck at 100,000. What did I just learn? Base salary is not flexible. I should not mess with base salary anymore. It's time to move on. But similarly, I asked for 120. They come back at 102. That's just a token improvement so they can kind of give me a thumbs up. I'm going to move on. I asked for 120 and they come back at 108. What if I said 112, right? What if I said 114? And so there's a little intuition there of like you're asking, are they flexible on the thing that I asked for? How flexible are they? Do I think there's flexibility left? Meaningful flexibility left, right? So if they come back at 117, could I ask for 118? Probably. Do I want to do that? No. What I want to do is say, how about a sign-on bonus? Or can you give me more equity or something else that has more than $1,000 of value to me? Can I get another week of vacation worth more than $1,000? And so you're ranking things and then you're negotiating based on that ranking. And that kind of implicitly takes care of that. The last thing I'll say is equity. Understand that equity will have a vesting schedule. First of all, you have to, boy, I could talk about this for a long time and half. There are different, let's say there are two buckets of types of equity. One is like public company equity that's like RSUs or GSUs if you're Google, right? RSUs in Amazon. In other words, essentially liquid stock that you will get and you will own and you can just sell it as soon as you get it. That's basically cash. There's also, let's call it like stock options in a seed stage startup. Basically worthless. Anyone will tell you that, right? They're not worth anything. They might one day be worth something, but right now on paper, they're worth almost $0. And with the way that startups work, probably eventually going to be worth $0 to you personally. And so first you have to decide, is this a tangible asset that I can put a value on? Yes or no? and then that will inform where it shows up on your list of things. So a lot of the clients that I work with as executives and leaders going to big tech, their base salary will be a third of their total comp package. So we will not negotiate base salary because it's just not as valuable as getting more equity. We can get a lot more. There's a lot more meat on the bone for equity and sign-on bonuses. And so first, understanding the value of the equity that you were offered, if it's a real value or a potential future value, and then where that stacks up relative to your base salary is important. How to negotiate equity is very similar. Understand that equity will have a vesting period, but if they offer you, so if they offer you $100,000 of equity, it will vest over 4 years. Typically, that's going to be $25,000 a year. But you would still apply the same kind of philosophy to it, 10 to 20%. But with equity, I usually just bump that up. Whatever my 10 to 20% number is, a rule of thumb for me is like double that. Just because equity is something that's usually more freely given, it's more available. It's a card that they can play that's less than cash because they're giving me ownership and not cash. It doesn't go on their books as like payroll expense. It's an equity expense. It's different. And so, if they offered me 100K equity, I probably would counter at like 140K equity, right? Which works out to like $10,000 a year that you're asking for. And so that's the general way to negotiate equity. For startups and, like I said, illiquid equity and like seed stage, those numbers can be a lot bigger. Sometimes they'll ask for double or triple the equity because it's all monopoly money anyway. So why not? But that's much more, art than science, I guess. So that's a long answer to your question. Hopefully I checked all the boxes there.
Well, and clearly we could talk all day about the
Literally, I can.
intricacies of, no, I mean, in a good way, because there's so many questions and so many nuances that come up in salary negotiations. And for so many of this audience where they've been in the same organization for decades,
Mhm.
now having to navigate these very, very muddy waters, this information has been incredibly helpful, invaluable. Um, letting people go at this point in time. Josh, you had mentioned, and I think we're going to put on the event page a link to how to download a copy of your book. Tell us more.
Yeah. So I was talking to Laura about I wanted to give everyone here something tangible that they could take away. In the past, Laura and I have done something where I get the paperback copy that you held up earlier. We get a copy of my book for people in like in-person events. This is not in person. So what do we do? So I think the easiest thing to do is just let you download my book. And so I think we'll share the link with you. It's fearlesssalary.negotiation.com/PWP.
And it's in
There's
the
a
chat.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay, great. So there's a link to there's a PDF, Mobi, which is basically Kindle or mostly e-readers, or EPUB, which is kind of a specialized e-reader. If none of those mean anything to you, just grab the PDF. But you can just click a link and download it. There's also an option to sign up for my newsletter on there if you want, but that's not necessary to get the book. You can literally just download the book. Please do that. I don't know how long I'll leave that page up because eventually the Google bot will find it and then the world will have access to download my book for free, which I prefer not to do. But for at least a while, I'm going to leave it up so that everybody can just download the book. Just grab the PDF, throw it in that, your books folder on your computer where all the books go that you never read. But maybe you'll read this one later. And hopefully, when you get that job offer, you go, oh yeah, did I download that guy's book? And you did, and it's in the books folder.
And it really is, it's condensed. It is not a difficult read. It's a very easy read. I literally keep it on my shelf and pull it out every time someone comes in and asks about salary negotiations. So please download that book. Any last words, final comments, wrapping us up, Josh, for today?
Just, I understand that many of you are coming from a world where negotiating salaries is just not a thing that is done. I think you're probably moving into a world where it is a thing that's done. And so I encourage you just to try it. It will be very scary at first. It's like I said, it's still scary for me, but give it a shot. Ask for 10% more, just that. And if it's as simple as they offer you 80 and you say, can you do 90? And just see what they say, just try it. And you'll feel, I think, empowered. And also you might be surprised that they say, what about 85? And you go, oh, I just got another $500 a month. Okay. So yeah, try it. I encourage you to try it. And I think you will feel better about your paycheck. And also, I think it feels better to do work when you know that you're being paid what you're worth.
And I love to end on that note that it's not an adversarial conversation. It's very much
No.
a win-win where they want you and you want the job. And so going at it from how do we get to a place where everybody is happy is a great way to approach these seemingly daunting conversations. So with that, Josh, I'm going to wrap us up. As Shai already said in the chat, we've got another session tomorrow, which is a panel discussion on how to transition into domestic nonprofits. So that's September 10th at 12 o'clock noon. Incredible lineup and speakers. So please make sure to pop in on that one if you can. Again, if you have missed any of our prior sessions or want to rewatch this great session with Josh, all of those recordings are on our website. Josh's recording will be up in the next couple of days. It takes just a couple minutes to turn it around and make sure that we've got that final product packaged well for all of you. So thank you all for joining us today. Josh, thank you again for your time and your expertise. Have a great rest of your day.